Institutions are essential parts of any society. Think about it. Police stations, schools, hospitals, businesses like Walmart and Trader Joe's are all core parts of a community. In a sense, they impose structure on how individuals behave. For example, if all the laws that exist in our community disappeared, would I still have a normal day? Probably not. People would be speeding down the street, looting my neighborhood coffee shop, and perhaps a stranger would be sleeping on my living room couch. All the things that I'm used to would be completely disrupted. Maybe a more reasonable example is, let's say all the schools had a new rule of no classes on Fridays. Then parents would have to figure out childcare for that day. Institutions and their rules definitively guide what we do. You may be thinking that you don't have a kid, and maybe you don't need childcare services. But in general, individuals are reliant on the institutions in their community. But is the reverse true? Do institutions need individuals? In general, they need lots of folks to contribute to allow them to function, but they don't typically need any one random individual. So there's a bit of an imbalance between institutions and individuals, if that makes sense. While they need individuals and are created by groups of individuals, they will continue even after the individual is gone. The concept of institutions may seem like a daunting idea, but try thinking of them as just a form fulfilling a need. Institutions meet the needs of society by filling expected roles and behaviors. For example, in order for a society to continue, it needs people year after year after year. The family institution makes sure that there will be people to carry on the next generation. We know society needs a way to keep people healthy, so you have the medical institution. And society even needs a way to encourage innovation and progress, so you have universities. There are two views of institutions, a conservative view and a progressive view. The conservative view sees institutions as being natural, positive byproducts of human nature. For example, the institution of hospitals forms naturally from the activities of humans and naturally benefits them. The progressive view takes the standpoint that institutions are artificial creations that need to be redesigned if they are to be helpful to humanity. So perhaps you can see businesses as potentially harming society if they aren't reined in. Now, unfortunately, institution is one of those words that has a very different meaning to a sociologist than it does to the average person. We average people might think of just a business or corporation when we hear the word institution. A sociologist, on the other hand, thinks of social structures when they hear the word institution. They think of governments, families, hospitals, schools, the legal system, religion, as well as businesses. Each of those parts of society continues on without regard to any individual. Governments continue even after the people within them turn over. Families continue from one generation to the next. Laws continue on after the people who wrote them are long dead and buried. Hospitals, schools, businesses, all continue past the time span of any individual, and are not dependent on any one individual either. We've heard in general about institutions, what they are, what role they play in society. Now, let's take a closer look at specific institutions, like education, family, and religion. Each of these institutions plays a fundamental role in both creating and supporting society, and each shapes the individuals who make up that society. Education is more than just going to school, memorizing what the teacher writes on the board, and taking a test on it a few weeks later. There is a hidden curriculum of information that is taught outside the official curriculum. We learn how to stand in line, how to wait our turn to ask a question, how to treat our peers. We learn without realizing it. We are socialized to internalize certain social inequalities, when girls and boys are treated differently in school by their teachers. Teachers expect different things from different students, and that expectation affects how students learn. Teachers tend to get what they expect from their students. If the teacher only expects a certain level of effort or skill, that's all the students will give them. Teachers put students into categories based on the student's perceived abilities, and the teacher expects certain things based on the categorization. But what if the categorization is wrong? Then the student is not challenged enough and might only meet the teacher's expectations, rather than exceeding the expectation to reach their true potential. Sometimes the limiting factor comes from outside the classroom itself. Schools experience educational segregation and stratification, in part because the way that we fund schools is most often through property taxes. This creates inequalities between different school districts, which have different property taxes. So the schools in lower income districts will often get less funding than those in affluent neighborhoods. You can see a reflection of the socioeconomic inequalities in our society in the funding given to schools and the residential segregation that occurs based on what neighborhoods people can afford to live in. There's a lot more to the institution of education than first meets the eye. Let's see what's hidden in some other institutions. Family is another institution essential to our society. It can be defined by many forms of kinship, including blood, marriage, and adoption. In the United States, we put more value on the small nuclear family than on the larger extended family, though that depends on the society. Different family values go hand in hand with different social obligations to the family, and also with the economy. Rural families were production-based, so large families were beneficial. As people moved into cities, families became consumption-based, so having a large family actually became a strain on their resources. With urbanization came changes in expectations of family roles in childcare. There's much diversity in family forms. A family can be a married couple or single parents, or step-families or gay couples, adoptive families, generation skips where the grandparents take care of the little ones, or some other unit I haven't mentioned. There is no one uniform type of family. When we talk about family, we have to talk about marriage and divorce. New families often begin with marriage, when people join together and begin a life together. For something that was intended to be rather permanent, citizens of the United States tend to experience multiple marriages in their lifetime. We are serial monogamous as we go from one marriage or relationship to the next. This means that divorce is becoming a normal aspect of family life. But because we expect marriage to be permanent, divorce creates tension, especially when children are involved in custody battles, or when a parent remarries. No family is perfect, and unfortunately, some families contain violence. We often hear of extreme cases of child abuse, where the child is physically abused, often by another member of the family. More common, though, is abuse through neglect, such as a lack of parental supervision, or poor nutrition, or insufficient clothing. Children aren't the only family members to be abused. Elder abuse occurs when families aren't ready for the responsibility of taking care of elders. Having no plan of who will take care of the elderly and the expense of nursing homes can lead to robbery, threats, and neglect of elder members of the family. Spousal abuse is also very common. Again, abuse is not just physical, it can also be psychological. While spousal abuse is usually perpetrated by men, men can also be the victims. Often, it is economic issues that lead to abuse, a pattern of behavior that takes years to escalate. It is about controlling the partner and limiting their support network, which makes it difficult for victims to get out of the situation. It is difficult for abused spouses to seek help. Women's shelters don't always accept kids, while for men, the social stigma that men don't get abused keeps them quiet. There's much more to the institution of family than raising a kid. Religion is another institution that permeates our society. The religiosity, or how religious a person is, can range from private beliefs to spiritual routines to institutionalized religion, or to reading the Bible but not attending church, to celebrating Passover because your grandmother cooks dinner, to facing the Qibla and praying 5 times every day. There are many types of religious organizations. Churches are established religious bodies like the Roman Catholic Church. Sects tend to be smaller and are established in protest of an established church. They are a revival and break away from the established church, like the movement of the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. Cults are more radical. They break away and reject the values of outside society, undergoing a complete religious renovation. They rise when there is a breakdown of societal belief systems, but they're usually short-lived because they depend on an inspirational leader who will only live for so long. Over the years, religion has been affected by social change. Modernization has led to more information being available to the public and less emphasis in society on religion, leading to secularization. Secularization, in turn, is the weakening of social and political power of religious organizations, as religious involvement and belief declines. But then you have the reaction to secularization in fundamentalism, when people go back to the strict religious teachings and beliefs, though this can create social problems when people become too extreme. In the end, in some shape or form, religion affects everyone in society. Now that we've examined education, family, and religion, Let's take a look at the government and economy. We give the government the power and authority to manage the country. Some governments take into consideration the will of the people, like democratic systems, where all citizens participate in government, like lawmaking and choosing officials. Others rule autonomously, like authoritarian systems, which command absolute obedience to authority. Dictatorships are authoritarian systems where the government is ruled by an individual without the consent of the citizens. Other types of political systems include communism, which is a classless, moneyless system where all property is owned by the community. A monarchy is a government that is embodied by a single person. There are many facets to the government, but the king or queen is the figurehead. There are also a couple different economic systems in our world. Capitalism is motivated by profits and features private ownership of production, with a market economy based on supply and demand. Socialism is motivated by what benefits the society as a whole, and features common ownership of production that focuses on human needs and economic demand. The division of labor in our government and economy is functionalist, meaning everyone is expected to have a responsibility in society. It is interesting how we value certain types of labor more than others. Garbage men, who are essential to society, are not well valued and not well paid. Athletes, on the other hand, are non-essential, but they are highly valued and well paid. We value jobs that require lots of specialization and education, rather than the jobs that are essential to our society. This creates inequalities because not everyone has access to those valued professions due to limited education or resources. We see this disparity throughout society, including education and healthcare and medicine. Healthcare and medicine is the final institution we will examine here. We know medicine exists to keep people healthy, but it also has other effects on society. Medicalization, for example, occurs when human conditions get defined and treated as medical conditions and become the subject of medical study, diagnosis, and treatment. This often occurs with mental health type issues like sadness and attention, but also can occur with physical issues like birth. People are becoming overdiagnosed with depression or ADD. While it is true that these are serious conditions, being sad doesn't mean you're depressed, and having difficulty focusing doesn't mean you have ADD. Birth has become medicalized as women and doctors plan C-sections rather than having natural births. Another effect of health and medicine is the sick role. This is the expectation within society that allows you to take a break from responsibilities in order to get better when you're sick. But if you don't get better or don't return to your place in society, you are viewed as deviant and harmful to society. A major part of the institution of health and medicine is the delivery of health care. There are massive inequalities in terms of access. We take care of the elderly through Medicaid and Medicare, and the children through child health insurance programs, but the people in between get left behind. These are the people who populate the working force, and when they get sick, it can seriously affect society. The Affordable Care Act is trying to fix this gap, but it's still too early to tell. We spend a lot of money on healthcare, but we don't get the desired outcomes because people still get sick. This is because we invest a lot more money in helping people once they are sick than in developing preventative medicine. Almost everyone will be sick at some point in their lives. The illness experience is the process of being ill and how people cope with their illness. Being ill can change a person's self-identity. The diagnosis of a chronic disease can take over your life, where every decision revolves around the disease. There are stigmas associated with certain diseases, like mental illnesses or STDs, that can affect how others perceive you. Even how people experience a disease differs depending on if they have access to resources, like palliative care. Social epidemiology looks at health disparities through social indicators, like race, gender, and income distribution, and it looks at how social factors affect a person's health. There is a correlation between social advantages or disadvantages and the distribution of health or disease. Well, there we have it, a closer look into a few of the institutions that make up and support our society. But this is just skimming the surface. There is so much more depth to every topic here, more effects, more consequences. Just take a look at your world to see how much more there is to these institutions that perhaps once seemed quite simple.